honored to welcome you to the third event of the TESS series of lectures and interactive events at the Humboldt University in Berlin. TESS stands for Transfer Within Education, Society and Science. My name is Malte Brinkmann. I'm a professor of general pedagogy at the Humboldt University. I'm currently the director of the Interdisciplinary Center of Educational Research. This EZBF brings together researchers from different fields of pedagogy, education, and teacher training, committed to complementary and interdisciplinary forms of cooperation. This series is carried out in cooperation with 3 institutions, the EZBF, and the second is the Humboldt Promint Kolleg, in which science education researchers collaborate with regard to science teaching and science education research. The Humboldt Promint Kolleg is represented through Anna Bimiermann and Annette Obmeier, which I welcome very warmly. Hello. And the third institution is the Professional School of Education of the Humboldt University, represented by Stefan Breitbach. Stefan, I welcome you as well. Hi. And the Professional School is a central contact point for all issues relating to teacher training programs. However, what is TESS? Why did we invent and implement TESS? In times of global transformations and crisis, the relationship between science and society, between university and public, is disputed and contested. The university as a public educational institution produces knowledge for society and thus also bears responsibility for the transfer and translation of this knowledge back into society. The series is intended to address topics of high social relevance, which are often discussed controversially in society. This include socio-scientific issues such as climate change, bioprotection or vaccine research on social cohesion, transfer, communication and technology, as well as conditions of digitality, but also questions of political and health education, democratic citizenship, education in post-factual times, and research on educational and social institutions in the process of change. Now, this third block deals with the institution of university or the idea of university in times of transformation. The event series TESS aims at bringing together the participant partners in an interdisciplinary perspective with the goal of initiating further collaborations and partnerships. And now I will hand over to Johannes and Maarten to introduce our first speaker in this third block. Thank you.
Thank you, Malte, for this introduction to the TESS project in general, and again, a warm welcome to everybody from our side as well. My name is Johannes Türstig. Me and my colleague Martin Weber-Schwanknebel, who you see waving here, are research assistants in the Department for General Pedagogy here at the Humboldt University of Berlin, and we are the organizers of this part of the TESS series under the title Malte just mentioned, The University in Times of Transformation. As researchers representing general pedagogy, we have a special interest in educational institutions. In this lecture series, we want to take a closer look at the university, since it is the institution that we are personally affiliated with the most at this moment, and since it's an institution that has been the subject of lively debate for quite a while now. We are particularly interested in fundamental pedagogical questions about what the university is, what it should be or what it can be, how it works, and how its relationship to society, meaning basically everything that happens outside of the university, can be understood and researched. All these questions can be understood in some way as questions about the idea of the university. We're of course not the first ones asking these kinds of questions. We are thus at least virtually, gathered here at the moment at the Humboldt University, meaning the very institution that can be seen as the first attempt to realize Wilhelm von Humboldt's idea of the university as we still mostly understand it today. Since he first shaped this idea of the university as an institution, it has been intensively criticized, discussed, reformed, and researched. The pedagogical discourse about the university can also be characterized as pretty diverse. Research concerning the university comes from many different perspectives, different paradigms, and it is conducted through a variety of different methods and approaches. We can't and we don't want to give an overview of the very diverse discourse about the university and its idea at this very point. Yet by organizing this lecture series, we want to provide an insight into current discussions about the relevance of the idea of the university today. For this, we are very pleased to have found 3 researchers who have agreed to share their thoughts and research with us. Following up on different current events and discussions, the talks within this lecture series, the talks that will follow later, will address 3 different topics. The first topic tonight is the conflicted relationship between face-to-face and online teaching, which became quite apparent under conditions of the corona pandemic and is also quite apparent right now. This is the topic for tonight's talk with Jan Masschelein. In the next second talk, which is going to happen 2 weeks from now with Christiane Thompson, who's also here tonight, we will address the question of academic freedom of speech, problematizing what can be said or what cannot be said at the university. And the last, third talk of our part of the TESS project will take place at the end of June, will be held by Norbert Ricken, and he will speak broadly saying about the voice of science and will further inquire the relationship between university and society. Last but not least, we are very happy to introduce Jan Masschelein. Thank you for being here with us again. Jan is a professor at the Laboratory for Education and Society of the KU Leuven in Belgium. His research includes philosophy, like among others, philosophy and theory of education, critical theory, and social philosophy. And one of his main research interests is, and has been for quite a while now, the university as a public institution and as a place of collective public study. In this context, he is now going to speak about regenerating on-campus education to reinforce the responsibility of the university, as the title of his lectures was announced. We are, this is the last thing I'm going to say, we are especially happy that Jan agreed to do this talk in a digital online format, a situation that bears a certain irony considering the fact that he will now be making a statement in favor of face-to-face teaching. With these brief introductory words, welcome again, Jan, and I'm going to hand over to you now. Thank you.
Okay, so good afternoon to all of you, and thank you very much for inviting me. So I must honestly say that I hope that this will be my last online performance. You could call it a web lecture, but I doubt whether it is a lecture at all. Let us call it a presentation. And as Johannes has said, it is very ironic to have a presentation for regenerating on-campus education, but do it online. Also, I have to apologize for the panel that I was not able to provide you with the text of what I'm going to say before this meeting, but I hope we nevertheless can have a discussion about it. So let me also say that this presentation is based on the work with Maarten Simons, my colleague, and that in the background of the presentation, there is a joint university course in which, through walking, mapping, conversation, recollection, recording, we explored the hypothesis that the campus embodies forces that sustain particular forms of public and collective study and the becoming of a studying body. In what follows, we first want to sketch very briefly how the university has to move into toxic environments, threatening to make the university, in a certain sense, irrelevant, because these spaces are constructed from and call into being 2 figures, the independent, personalized learner and the innovative, autonomous researcher. we will pay attention here mainly to the first figure. So these figures are imagining the university as a protecting and facilitating infrastructure for their increasingly personalized learning and research trajectories, leading to excellence and employability. In the second step, we actually want to reclaim the university as a particular arrangement of study practices, which in itself contribute to the future in a particular way, not by facilitating and protecting research and learning, and learners and researchers, but by complicating and exposing them in practices of public and collective study and through common pedagogical infrastructures that actually help them to become students and scholars. This reclaiming of the university implies, we think today, that the university campus has to be regenerated, its deterioration and even its destruction being on its way already long before COVID, but being heavily intensified by the pandemic. So first of all, becoming independent learners and autonomous researchers in need of personalized trajectories leading to employability and excellence. So while reading the current European discourses on the university and its inhabitants, and looking at the various policy instruments, think about the European credit transfer system, the European framework, the Dublin indicators, the key performance indicators, etc., which are organizing the European higher education area and the European research area, so already there, a separation between education and research, it is clear that the orientations of excellence and employability frame the role of universities in a very particular way. They define research as the production of knowledge, education as the production of learning outcomes, and service as the production of impact on social and economic development or innovation. They actually give birth to the figures of the independent learner and the autonomous innovative researcher. Today in English, but also in other languages, and I suppose also in German, we see the overall use of the notion of learner, which implies to leave behind the old connotations that still stick to the notion of being a student. Whereas this notion still seems to refer to the place of learning, a student is a student of university or of a higher education institution, or to a kind of social position, when we say I'm just only a student, the self-conscious learner has emancipated herself from all institutional attachments. Her only concern is learning. Everything else is secondary. Where, when, how, long, through what refers only to modalities. This learner is a figure that is constantly addressed in policy discourses and for whom all kinds of policy instruments and procedures are developed. So let me refer to this European credit transfer and accumulation system and the guidebook that is related to it to help to describe the existential condition of the learner. It is used by many educational institutions to organize, reform, and monitor their programs and curricula in terms of the accumulation of credits obtained in possibly different institutions and can be the result of both formal and non-formal learning. At the center lies the credit. And quote, it is a quantified means of expressing the volume of learning based on the workload students need in order to achieve the expected outcomes of a learning process at a special level, end of quote. So credits can be accumulated, and the accumulated credits can lead to a qualification, and they can be transferred. Hence, the basic principle is the quantification of study on the basis of the time that is needed to produce particular learning outcomes. The guidebook also strongly emphasizes that this is a learner-centered approach. And it is here also that we get a good impression of the kind of independent learner that this ECTS is imagining. And I quote again, an independent learner may accumulate the credits required for the achievement of a qualification through a variety of learning modes. She or he may acquire the required knowledge, skills, and competence in formal, non-formal, and informal contexts, and this can be the result of an intentional decision or the outcome of different learning activities over time. End of quote. So the learner one imagines or projects here is the one where the learning process happens independent of predefined curricula, educational context. But at the same time, someone whose learning experience and learning outcomes can always be counted, accumulated, verified, and validated or recognized. In that sense, the independent learner appears as a kind of de-institutionalized or detached student. The notion learning outcome, so one of the key building blocks in the European space of higher education, helps to understand that what is needed when looking through the eyes of the learner, helps to understand what is needed when looking through the eyes of the learner. Learning outcomes transform the site of study into more or less productive learning activities and allow to make transparent to stakeholders what learners have achieved. The basic logic being to decide in advance and in detail what the outcome of each learning activity should be. For the independent learner, university education becomes organized as a network of personalized learning trajectories to guarantee optimal learning gains. One could say that the student is addressed as a kind of professional learner, if you want, who invests in her human capital, produces competences to increase her employability. For this learner, learning is a very stressing business, looking for study trajectories with market value or with added value, niches, opportunities to invest, choices with high returns, creative accumulation of competencies and credits to accredit herself. She has indeed to manage and accumulate these credits, ECTS points, and she has to count the learning time. Professional learners do not simply attend courses or go to the university, but make calculated choices. They look for competency-based education so that they have a good idea of what they will learn, and which offers flexible learning trajectories and clear-cut modules in order to allow for fast adaptations in terms of investment of time and money and leading to employability. Professional learners require education that is oriented towards their needs, that is learner-centered and personalized. The university is useful for such productive and calculated study practices as long as it offers protection and facilitation. The university is there for them, to protect them, to reduce investment risks, and today increasingly also to offer therapeutic support to be able to live their stressful lives. And it makes apparently little sense to them to reverse the question and ask whether they are there for the university. Many of the European frameworks have exactly the following objective: to transform the student into a learner and making the learner independent from institutionalized forms of education. Clearly, this independency is only one side of the coin. ECTS makes clear that the independent learner is at least also dependent of recognition, of validation, and of qualifications and standards, and hence also of agencies and procedures that make them operate. The situation is similar when it comes to research, where it becomes difficult to ignore that research is seen as a production process with knowledge as the produced output. And this is clearly considered not only a way of looking or speaking about research, but also a way of organizing research. The European space of research today is a space that permanently and relentlessly mobilizes researchers, PhD students, postdocs, to orientate themselves to accumulation, for example, of citations, of projects, of publications, and which is maybe ignored often in critical commentaries, to look permanently for accredited or recognized recognition for their learning outcomes or research results. Academic conduct in search of excellence and employability implies indeed a particular mode of visibility. In order to exist as an academic, what is required is to make oneself, in terms of performance, visible through permanently staging oneself. It is to construct profiles and to manage these profiles. This profiling being essential to run one's business as an academic. As for the independent learner, the freedom or autonomy of the researcher is only one side, since she is increasingly depending on the recognition of her productivity and impact. So, despite its emptiness, the orientation towards excellence and employability actually changes the academic world at all levels, including the mode of existence and the ethos of the inhabitants of the university and the studies practices. Indeed, the University of Excellence and Employability is a habitat where the figures of the independent, personalized learner and the innovative, autonomous researcher understand themselves as entrepreneurs, which is meanwhile a very common way to talk about them, and being involved in production of competencies or knowledge, in speculation, on profitable investment, in calculation of credits, in accumulation of competences and publications, the capitalization of innovations and learning outcomes. They require, you could say, fast science and fast education, increasingly involving dashboards and learning analytics that help to automate and accelerate learning and fast science and to position oneself against others. However, it becomes unclear why and whether the innovative researcher and the independent learner actually need the university. Their mode of existence no longer seem to be intrinsically linked to or interwoven with the university. Probably these figures still stay within or make use of the university as long as the university is functional. And hence, as long as the university is oriented towards excellence and employability, and also, I would say, is concerned for their vulnerability, for example, for their work-life balance, as it is often called today. But little imagination is needed to notice that the independent learner and the innovative researcher always look for other, more productive or enabling environments. It is indeed the university that is put in the position to indicate its added value for the independent learner and the autonomous researcher. So, coming to my second part, starting from the perspective of the university, it could be said, so not from the independent learner or the autonomous researcher, it could be said that in order to give birth to the independent learner and the autonomous researcher as the owners of their own learning, their own research, their own publications, their own opinions, their own credits, their own profile, their own learning and research trajectory, pursuing their own interests in view of the ideal of self-profiling, which implies to put the learner and the researcher at the center. The campus and the institution have increasingly become the target of a destruction and abandonment. The independent learner and the autonomous researcher are not born through a process of emancipation from oppressions, but through the destruction of or the separation from dependencies and interdependencies and attachments to a place, a time, a practice, and a matter. And the prize for the excellence and employability that these independent learners and researchers strive at is the triumph of what we could call sad passions that isolate them both in an uneasy and anxious competition, in a vulnerable condition, about the stress that there is to compete, and in an insatiable hunger for recognition. The pandemic and the going online of the university, and just a side remark, the digital space being itself also strongly person-centered. Think about the personal computer, the personal profile, the personal search, the personalized phone, and being in a way also the most modern invention. This going online of the university has reinforced and intensified the trend towards personalization personalization, and to put the learner and the researcher at the center, which implied the further destruction or neutralization of the campus. I think, or we think as a result, that the university is increasingly being robbed of its unique capacity for study, its unique power as a gathering for collective and public study, which was the original notion of the university, the universitas study, which you could literally translate as the studying collective. So its unique power that constitutes its specific response ability, a process that has been going on for some time already and has now made some people even wonder whether the university will still make it to 2040. This was the title of one book by Bert van der Zwaan, or another very recent title being How Universities Die. We think that university matters, that it is in fact crying out for our concern as precisely one of the tools or assemblage of tools to address damaged and chaotic worlds and to becoming capable not of solving problems, but of responding. That is, of sensing, imagining, thinking and taking care of worlds. And maybe if we follow people like Chakrabarty, we maybe have to add the planet. And because it matters, we should, especially as educationalists, be concerned for regenerating the campus. That is, for regenerating what we could call a common pedagogical infrastructure, including practices, architectures, time and space arrangements, that precisely are intended to get the learner out of the center. Let me recall, and Humboldt has been mentioned already, and is, you cannot you cannot avoid referring to him, but let's recall what Humboldt stated, that professors do not exist for the students or the students for professors, and so the university not for students or professors, but that both exist for science. A formulation which we might be willing to modify a little in further qualifying science as slow, while confronted, I will come back to that, with the mess of the world through its students. But a formulation which precisely states very clearly that it is not about the learner or the researcher. Regenerating a common pedagogical infrastructure that is getting the learner out of the center, and that instead of separating us from dependencies and attachments, reinforces the acknowledgement that, as Isabel Stenger states, we are situated, always, somewhere, sometime, with something, and that we are made able to respond, which is not the same as to solve problems. We are made able to respond with others, thanks to others, and also at the risk of others. Hence, the acknowledgement that we are depending on and obliged by the relationships we create with others, both human and non-human, depending on what we want to call pedagogic forms. So if we have to become able to act and imagine, to be sensible to what the world has to say, to become able to respond, then we need to regenerate and not further sterilize or neutralize the relationships, for example, between students and professors and science, so between the three, or matter. We need to regenerate the pedagogic forms that provide questioning situations, with questions that in a certain sense the character of an enigma, and also question those to which the enigma speaks. What are you going to do with me? The pedagogic forms are in need not of learners, but of students, that is, people that accept and recognize to be dependent. But also the way around, it are pedagogic forms that embody forces to become a student. Forces that can help to load worlds into words into hands, eyes, and ears that can learn us to be affected and make distinctions that matter. I come back to that. The course I mentioned in the beginning was guided by the hypothesis that in its architecture, in its work forms and disciplines, in the gatherings and moods it engenders, in the kind of pedagogical life it stages, the campus embodies forces that can make a particular kind of study happen and sustain the becoming of a studying body. A body that acknowledges to be situated and to be dependent in order to sense, think, and imagine. Or putting it otherwise, in order to become a university student, you need the campus. You depend on the campus. And in our course, we precisely tried to give voice to the campus. We attempted to articulate, of course in a limited way, what the campus enacts, what it makes happen, how it affects. And hence the walks, for example, were not about mapping the campus as a physical or cultural environment or picking up the ideas or meanings that buildings convey in their so-called silent teachings, but about the observation and registration of affective intensities, of forces that make us move or do something or prevent us from doing something, so are affecting us and also learn us to be affected. Becoming a student of chemistry, geology, architecture, geography, law, social, political, or educational science is about acquiring a body that is more and more sensitive to what these worlds have to say. University education is about acquiring organs, ears, eyes, tongue, nose, hands, minds, capable of making distinctions that matter in chemical, geological, juridical, social, and educational worlds. By acquiring organs for inhabiting richly differentiated worlds, by doing that, we give voices to this world, expressed in how they effectuate the body or put it in motion. The world becomes talkative. This acquisition, and giving voice is made to happen through artificial layers or setups, mediations, including these pedagogic forms, that are both produced by and produce what Cetina called the collective body of science, in which one starts to partake. This body is at once and always open collective and the collection, a gathering of practices, things, instruments, guidelines, rituals, protocols, and people, and more things probably. So the learning to be affected is related to made setups, more usually known as lectures, seminars, workshops, lab exercises, excursions, library visits, and so on, which play a crucial role in enabling the world to become talkative and in sensitizing us to what it says. It are made setups that enable us, so to speak, to taste the world, and in so doing to work on our ability to notice these distinctions, to notice distinctions that matter. That means to study. These artificial setups materialize the effort, the concentration, the focus and discipline that help, on the one hand, to resist what we could call the automation of looking, reading, listening, and feeling, and on the other hand, to realize a certain attention and presence of mind. So let me refer to some concrete practices and operations that contribute to becoming a student. Let me first point to all the mediatic displacements from one medium to another that contribute to transforming something into a matter of study. The notion of mediatic displacement, which was coined by Maarten, refers to the event of transcoding in which more than one medium is used successively, such that the effect of one medium is cancelled through another medium. It achieves a suspension and placing at a distance of something already embedded and structured by codes. The lecturer's voice displaces the text, the student's gaze displaces the voice, The writing hand displaces the text and the voice, and then the text again is read and commented while displacing voice and writing, and so on, in endless circular movements of displacement. This educational suspension enables also thinking to erupt. Mediums thus subject to displacement can of course include slides, experimental setups, formulae, diagrams on blackboards, models, and also, very importantly, the various forms of the spoken word. Thoughts and texts are literally turned to speech. They are spoken, but so too are formulae, numbers, rocks, and chemical elements. All are mediatically displaced into speech or talk, albeit in varying styles and tones according to educational atmospheres of the different made setups. Indeed, a teacher or student speaks differently and is therefore differently affected by thoughts, text, formulae, tones, and so on, depending on whether she is present in an auditorium or involved in a seminar, an excursion, an exercise, or a webinar. These differences matter. We could refer here to the work of Françoise Waquet, who has described how orality is indeed a crucial element of courses, which we tend sometimes to forget because of our reliance on written sources. She points to the impact of the spoken word in lectures, exercises, excursions, conferences, and the endless conversations before and after courses in hallways and corridors. The university for her is par excellence the milieu, I quote, the milieu of spoken science. Moreover, Waquet stresses that oral activities serve not just to transmit knowledge, but precisely also to produce it, while at the same time putting it to the test. And in this context, we could also refer to Boaventura de Sousa Santos, who uses the notion of orature, besides literature, so orature, referring to its performative dimension of actually composing words. Moreover, different kinds of sessions with their particular setups, different literality and orality, make the worlds talk back or object, you could say, in different ways, through the comments, clarification, questions of other students, confrontations with examples, and so on. One learns new words, new names, which do not just represent immaterial thought. They also change how a world is loaded into words and names, and how words and names can affect us. We need indeed to be aware of the unpredictable and uncontrollable ways in which these sessions affect words, and the ways in which words in turn affect us. What we could call our rediscovery of on-campus education happened through a course. It made us also realize the presence and particular importance not only of mediatic, but also of bodily displacement. There are indeed good reasons to claim that one goes to the university and to the campus, and to recall that course actually refers to a movement. Course programs not only indicate what a course is about, what a course is about and who the teacher is, but also tells the students where to go. Going to the campus and moving across the campus from one session to another is also a certain undergoing, a form of exposure. It is very opposite of being installed at home or in your student room, and it is different too from surfing online. Walking on campus, attending and passing the various buildings, the rooms, libraries, and so on, is not like surfing the Blackboard platform of clicking from one Zoom session to another Teams meeting. In the words of Timothy Maarten, there are different times flowing out of different things, shaping different spaces. Moreover, going to class, to the course, creates a particular in-between time, a time of transition, which could make also one aware and expectant for the eventual adventure of an encounter, not only with others, but also with something of the world. Attending a course on campus is site-specific. You go to the university to a particular room at a scheduled time. This room is more or less dedicated to and defined by a certain practice. It has no bed or bath, but ordered seats, blackboards, tables, lab equipment, collective screens, all of which place limits on what can be done there, forcing a certain discipline, a certain posture. In a lecture hall, you cannot normally move the chairs or the blackboard. Your gaze is to some extent directed, which is quite different from looking at a laptop screen, which can display all manners of formats, allowing you to switch also from one to the other without any change of posture at all. And importantly, I think this is really a very important point, always leaving you the option to click out of them altogether. Course rooms do not allow this option. Course rooms cannot be appropriated at will. You cannot simply make yourself at home in them. To the contrary, they resist your efforts to do so, reminding you that you are somewhere else, in a place of exposure, of study with fellow students rather than with family or friends, a place where you are not just a spectator, but a participant. Going to the course room thus offers a location which is neither in the cloud nor at home. Whereas at home or in her student room, the student might indeed be considered to be a center of attention and decision-making, the one who decides what is going to happen. The made setups of courses aim to get the student out of the center, both liberating the student from having to decide everything for herself and making the world talkative and demanding or obliging. She finds herself confronted with something in the midst, or at least with what we try to keep in the midst, with others around the table. The thing on the table, not the student, is now the center of attention around we join or around we come together. As one of our students also said, the transition from one place or session to another gives you the experience of ending one thing or leaving it behind and beginning another. It offers you a time you cannot reverse, rewind, or pause. This is not merely subjective. As Manuel Castells already observed some 3 decades ago, the time of the digital network is instantaneous in the sense that it is non-sequential. There is a systematic perturbation in the sequential order. The elimination of the sequencing creates precisely an undifferentiated time, which, he says, is tantamount to eternity. Since eternity is endless, there is no real reason to choose. Everything either loses its meaning or becoming equally meaningful. So I want to refer to what is a very common practice here in Leuven, at least, is to record the lectures, to record the seminars, to really record them so that you can look at them when you want. So it is not offering a structure anymore of your time. So this sense of the undifferentiated time was in fact precisely deployed by our university board during the pandemic as a reason to promote the live streaming of lectures and seminars rather than relying on recorded or pre-recorded videos. The board argued that this would offer some structure to students who were otherwise confined to their rooms with nothing but their laptops for company. So we come to the end. So through walking, observing, talking, sketching, picturing, recording, and modeling, we have tried to make the campus talk along the paths of our attention. In a way, we could say that we rediscovered the campus as a collective body of education, a common pedagogical infrastructure, an ever-expanding collection of artificial setups, which we call pedagogic forms, embodying the forces that allow for study as a way to be, as a way of learning to be affected. The campus as a physical environment becomes a place of study through the enactment of multiple and placed collections and collectives, which engender encounters with worlds. A campus in this sense is an active educational force, both producing and produced. Enactments have to be performed, and the collections and collectives that emerge from them are fragile and always temporary, even if material infrastructures and institutional context lend, or lended maybe, the campus a certain durability. Their forces depend on many elements which need to be held in balance in order to keep the talking, objective and objecting world in our midst. Online learning can never replace on-campus education, though it can surely add to it. The digital collectives, the webinar, the Zoom session, the Teams meeting, the Skype call, the collaborate session can add more mediations to the composition of the worlds at stake in university education. Our point, however, is not to idealize today's university education, nor to deny the questionable content of some course curricula, nor is it even to ignore all the criticism that has been directed towards universities and university education. But walking the abandoned campus and building a course from the inside has caused us to recollect and reimagine the forces that prevent university courses from turning into closed, automated, or imposed discourses. Real study always entails the de-automation of our thinking and sensing, enabling us to learn to listen to worlds. In this case, for us, the world of university education. It might sound maybe a little bit strange, but we could say that through the way we engaged with university campus, she actually became an idea. We did not start from the university as an idea. An idea not in the sense of a mental image, a representation or a concept, but in the sense of Gilles Deleuze, in the sense of a questioning, I quote, a questioning imperative which forces us to think, which received the problematizing power to transform all the reasons we had to distrust the university and the campus, and the power to awaken our imagination. Hence our articulations, and I just offered some of them, are no justifications why the university campus should indeed matter. They rather try to intensify the idea, to give it the power to transform our relations to the reasons that advise us not to take the matter, not to take the campus into account. It is important to recall also with Humboldt once more that the university is dealing with issues and questions, with challenges to which we have not yet a response. Moreover, we don't know how and to what extent our necessary abstractions, our concepts, our theories, and the possible new facts and data, new nature, new things, new ways of doing that our sciences produce or conceive will have consequences for our common life and common world. And precisely therefore, we have to be vigilant, attentive, thoughtful. We have to exercise caution. In the words of Steingers, il faut faire attention. And this also implies precisely to consider that we might be wrong or mistaken. But this consideration is not an individual competence or capacity, and it is not just a matter of attitude or choice. The exercise of caution is related to the way in which the university organizes and arranges the possibility to be objected, to be confronted with what we have not yet considered and taught. In this sense, the university refers not to a kind of institution, but foremost to a practice consisting of material arrangements and technologies that make something possible. What it arranges in creating possibilities for objection is making public what one knows and thinks and confronting it with a public of students. I think that it is precisely the pedagogy of the university. It is her forms and practices of study that arrange and embody there are the forms and the practices of study that arrange and embody such collective public forms of thoughtfulness, cautiousness, vigilance, and attentiveness. And it are exactly these forms and practices that are changed when organizing today's research and learning environments approach in terms of customization. That is, starting from what they offer for the learner or the researcher in their outcome-defined and outcome-driven businesses. These collective and public study practices are first of all interested in something of the world, a phenomenon, a thing, an issue, and of what becomes of it. Hence, it is not about, and think about again about what Humboldt was saying about science. Hence, it is not about, which is, as you all better know than I do, which is a very poor translation of the German Wissenschaft. So hence, it is not about what becomes of me as a learner or a researcher, but what becomes of worlds. It are these practices that extend worlds, expand them, populate it with more beings and things, and hence invoke or conjure immediately the question of how to live together with these beings and things that emerge and come to life. Let me give just a last remark on the notion of regeneration, which, as Stengers reminds us, is not part of the register of optimization, for example, of the learning process, and the register of progress, the progress of science, but refers to making particular gatherings, again, capable of generating collective and public study and of generating capacities to sense, to be affected. When we regenerate these gatherings or tools for collective and public study, it is not simply about restoring or reproducing just the old ones or to replace them, but indeed, in a certain sense, to re-begin with them and to cultivate what I would call the art of staging the pedagogical life that, according to Emil Durkheim, was the meaning of the notion studium in this phrase that characterized the university as universitas studi, as the association of study. So thank you for your attention.